Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Alien Earth Season 1 Episode 8. It's called The Real Monsters. So spoilers for the episode as always. It is the season finale. I'm laughing a little bit at the title of the episode because I feel like man is the real monster after all is kind of the point of a lot of monster movies, right? It's always something we get to, including Alien. Like Aliens specifically, is, Ripley has that line. I don't know who's worse of them. Actually, no. Yeah, it's her. Yeah, I was going to say, maybe, is that Hicks? No, that's definitely Ripley. You don't see them effing each other over for a percentage, right? Great line. Nothing wrong with making that point. Many, many good monster movies, TV shows, stories have made that same point. But given how much I've complained about this show sounding pretentious, only to get to the final episode of the season, and for them to actually be titling their final episode The Real Monsters, just made me laugh a little bit. Because for all of its posturing throughout the season, it's not really going any deeper than anything else ever has, it feels like. Anyway, I was very critical of the last episode. Episode 7 I thought was pretty much bad through and through. I had very little positive to say, and I can't really say I have much more positive to say about this episode either. It was a very unfulfilling finale. It has cliffhangers, which is not a problem in and of itself, but it kind of felt like the writing of this show has been this kind of just noose around itself the entire time. And there's an example in the middle of this where the episode starts with all the synth kids in a cage, effectively, right? This circular cage. And there's another circular cage that has Joe and Morrow in it. And Morrow turns to Joe and says, "Do you know what it costs when a corporation gives you something?" Talking about his artificial lung in the same way that he's got his artificial enhancements. And Joe says, "Everything." And Morrow responds to that with, "Everything doesn't even begin to cover it." I laughed out loud at that exchange because this, to me, was an example of the show trying to seem deep, of trying to sound smarter than it is, and trying to add this sort of big, grand idea to the statements that are being made. And all I can think, honestly, is that, no, everything does cover it. That's what everything means. And I'm not saying you can't flower it up a little bit. I'm not saying you can't embellish. You can have someone say, "Oh, it costs everything," and then somehow it still feel like more. Or you can have someone say something like that. It's fine. Part of it's on delivery, part of it's how the scene's directed. There's a lot of other things get into it. But I laughed out loud when Morrow said everything doesn't begin to cover it, because it just feels like it's trying so hard to sound profound. It's trying so hard to make it feel like there's a meaning to all this. And at this point, I'm not convinced there really is much of a meaning to everything. I think the other big thing for me in this episode is just how, like, unearned everything feels. Everything just kind of happens in a very kind of nonchalant way. The whole thing, a lot of the episode is Wendy or Marcy from the cell manipulating the technology around the building, because we've established she can do that. She can also communicate with the xenomorph and have that do her bidding. And she does all this from the cell, very nonchalant. They were never really trapped there. She could open the door at any time she wanted, which is probably the only moment in the whole episode that I remotely liked, if I'm honest, is the moment where Boy Cavalier's standing in front of that door and Wendy just opens it with a wave of the hand. And then when she says "run" at the end of that scene. That is the only moments I got something out of it, and I think it's just because seeing Boy Cavalier a little bit scared was at least something, because I kind of don't like that character. And even in a lot of the other scenes in this episode where he's technically on the back foot, I still found him irritating. I still found like his presence annoying. I don't know, it wasn't really doing all that much for me. I guess I felt like he should have been acting a little bit more stressed, a little bit more scared. Like he's very nonchalant about the fact that there's a xenomorph running around. Which, let's talk about the xenomorph running around a little bit, actually. In particular, there's one moment where it sneaks up behind Sylvia and is staring her in the face. Now, it gets scared off by the Merc team. But maybe, just maybe, and there was a bit of this last episode, but this moment really stuck out to me, is maybe you should not show your xenomorph in broad daylight in a close-up. Because even the better versions of the xenomorph in the original Alien, they still stuck to the shadows. They still had it in darkness. It was always, flashes of light. It was creeping around dark corners, all that kind of thing. There's a reason maybe you don't just shove it in broad daylight where you can see every nook and cranny of its body in high detail. Especially when you've got a worse looking version with this dry head that I don't particularly like either. But the entire time it just kind of felt a little bit goofy, and almost every scene with the xenomorph in this episode felt that way to me. So that's its own problem, though. That's like that's getting away from the writing side of things, which is really what I have a big problem with in this episode. My big thing last episode is that we spent all that season, most of the season, building up to Morrow getting to the island, the chaos being unleashed, and it felt like it all got wrapped up very quickly and neatly by the end of last episode. And we had the confusing, and when I say confusing, not that I didn't understand it, but confusing from like what are you even doing here kind of thing. So the fact that this episode starts off with the island in lockdown and the xenomorphs running around, and now we're treating it like a security concern, but every single character has been put in cells and like everyone's already kind of back in place. It's just the xenomorph running around now. I don't know. It all just feels a little bit too neat and quick and easy, which I guess is how I feel about a lot of things in this show. But add on to that, Nibs. The whole thing at the end of last episode was Nibs was killing some of the mercs, and Joe, in a moment of panic, shot at her with the electro rifle thing. And Wendy lost her shit and screamed, "What did you do?" Now that ending, the way she reacted, told me that Nibs was dead. Because that's the only reason why that reaction would even start to make sense. I didn't like it even when I thought she was dead, because it felt like out of nowhere, and it still felt like Wendy's character's been flipping backwards and forwards. Like, she doesn't have character arc. She just changes on a whim whenever the writers want her to. And it's been a problem that I've complained about in past episodes, where she's all for Boy Cavalier, now she's against Boy Cavalier. She's with Joe, she hates Joe, and this episode keeps that thing going. But forgetting all that, if you're telling me her reaction's that strong, her screaming, "What did you do?" and treating this like Joe has betrayed her, I had to read that as she's gone. Nibs has been fried beyond repair. She is effectively dead. We start this episode, and not only is Nibs alive, Nibs doesn't even look in pain. Her clothes, I mean, maybe they gave her a change of clothes, but her clothes don't even look damaged. She's just chilling in the cell with the other synths. It feels like nothing of consequence actually happened on that boat. Why should I give a shit? Nothing mattered. Nothing of consequence mattered. It's so frustrating. And I like throughout the rest of the episode, like when Wendy or Marcy, whatever name you want to use, she's looking through the cameras on the monitor from the cell, and she's like cycling through, and it is very kind of sociopathic, where she's kind of letting bad things happen to various people and whatnot. She's kind of orchestrating everything, like she's the one in charge. But she's watching her brother on the cell at one point on the monitor, and it's let me get his name, Smee, the other of the two, the pair of synths. He comes up and kind of like sticks up for him and says, "Hey, don't be mad at him, he's one of us." And Wendy's like, "But he shot Nibs, and he just kind of shrugs and goes, "Yeah, she was killing people." It just pats her on the shoulder. And then she decides to unlock the cell with her tech power. She just unlocks the cell to their door, to the Morrow and Joe door. And then they go wandering, and Morrow, gets he's got like a big, like, sort of muzzle thing on his arm, so he can't use his cyborg hand. But he gets that off after he takes the key from the guard, and his plan is to go and kill Kirsch and do stuff. Which, again, all season, we've been building up to Morrow getting to this island, and we've even set up a little bit of a rivalry between him and Kirsch and the few interactions they've had. So he's sneaking up to Kirsch. Kirsch realizes, turns around, they have a fight. And frankly, it's a little bit underwhelming. It doesn't really amount to a whole lot. Ultimately, when the kids do get out of the cell and Wendy kind of gives them all like jobs, she's like, hey, you go and find this character, you go find that character. She gives Smee and Slightly the job of going to Kirsch and Morrow and going to get them. And basically Slightly like sees Morrow on the ground and he's injured and he can't really defend himself. And Morrow says, hey, I want you to know that I never actually hurt your mother. And Slightly, understandably, in this moment, given everything he's went through with this character controlling him and blackmailing him all season, hits him in the face with a big canister thing. And it's like a big hard hit. And I was like, okay, so is he dead? Is Kirsch dying? Because he's got pretty beat up here. One of my big kind of peeves of this episode is that by the end, when they've locked up everyone who's not a synth kid, other than Joe, right? All of the, Boy Cavalier, the other humans, adults, and both Kirsch is obviously a synth as well, but he's working for them. And it turns out so is Adrian Emerson's character. He's also a synth. Because Marcy just like makes him stop moving because he's connected to the network when he's about to start fighting. So they're all just locked up at the end. And every single one of them are fine. They're all alive. This felt so toothless to me that they didn't kill off one character, because it just kind of felt like, oh, we want all these characters around in season 2, so we're not actually going to do anything, again, that has consequences. It doesn't feel like anything, like, Yutani and her, like, colonial marine army are on their way to the island, and they're still just about to arrive at the end of the episode. We see that the ship's all flying in, but that's right at the end before the cliffhanger. We don't actually get that conflict in this episode. That's actually been left for season 2. If they even show that, they might skip ahead and just sort of give us some fill-ins about what happened. But they've been building to them storming the island in some capacity. And the stealth attack on the island, which happened last episode with Morrow when he's a small team, was underwhelming and didn't really feel like it lived up to anything they'd been building to. So the fact that they then kept cock teasing throughout this episode that Yutani's forces are coming, and then just just didn't get to it. I don't know. I also found that a little anticlimactic and underwhelming. But all that would be one thing if I really was invested in the character stories. All that would be something that I could pretty much forgive if I really cared about some great character arc where Marcy is going through this stuff, and the one or two moments where she scares Boy Cavalier are okay, because it's like, okay, she's being proactive, she's taking a leadership role. That's at least a little bit interesting in a vacuum. I can kind of see where we might have built to that in a satisfying way. But there's also other times where the show is getting into its pretentious writing stuff, where she's talking to the others, and this is when they're still locked up, and she's like, hey, maybe we are ghosts. Because one of them says we're ghosts. We're not alive, we're not adults, we're ghosts, right? Because we're ghosts of these kids that are put in the ground. And that question of, are we really the kids, or are we just copies, that's still kind of up in the air, I feel like, at the end of this episode. But she's like, yeah, we are ghosts. And what do ghosts do? Ghosts scare people. We've been afraid of them, but they should be afraid of us. And that kind of sets up. But that was one of those scenes where I was kind of rolling my eyes at the dialogue a little bit, because you know what point she's getting to. You can see it coming a mile off, but it's not like you're excited about everyone else in the room realizing what she's saying. And part of that, I think, is because they've not developed this group of characters enough for me to be excited that they're all rallying behind her, potentially. Even Curly, who's kind of the most antagonistic one to her, there's really not much to her character. She wants to be the favourite. She's even still saying that at the start of the episode. I'm supposed to be the favourite. Why am I in here with you lot? But as soon as, Marcy shows some power and unlocks the door and scares Boy Cavalier, she's falling into line. She's like, yes, boss, I'll go and hunt down Sylvia for you. Actually, no, Nibs does that. What does she do? She goes after the Merc team. That's right. Which the Merc team, by the way, they just wander around the island looking and what going through the complex. They basically we cut to them every so often, killing time, doing some fake outs until they eventually get to the lab near the end of the episode, and the plant monster, which we've not really seen too much of since it was introduced back in episode 2, actually consumes the main woman in that group that we've been kind of following, the one that Joe knows. and she's killed. But I don't know. I just everything about the progression of this is very unsatisfying to me. They do kind of like almost like a bit of dark humor where earlier in the season we all thought well we didn't just think, we knew that Joe was the target for Slightly to use a face hugger, right? That was like a big thing in the middle of the season. But then, of course, Joe wasn't face hugged, and it ended up being Arthur instead. They kind of pull the same trick here, where Joe is the target. Boy Cavaliers requested that he be the victim for the eye alien. So he's lured to the room with the eye alien, and we get a whole sequence where he jumps in this little cage cell that the sheep eyeball alien and his sheep body was in beforehand. And then Wendy eventually storms in and throws the alien to the side. I did think they showed very little disregard for the fact that it was still lying there for a while. Eventually we see it sneak out of the room, but it's like, come on, go and squish it or something. And I'm not saying that I want the alien to be gone, because it's the most interesting thing in the show by quite a margin. But it just didn't make any sense to me that they were just not addressing the fact that it's still just kind of lying over there. Like, go and make sure it's dead. Do something somewhat logical, please. That would be great. But then she pulls her whole hand of God thing and stops Adrian Emerson from moving. And I guess the conversation she has with Joe afterwards should feel like a big deal, right? It should feel like a big deal that they're addressing kind of this difference between them right now. And all it did was frustrate me, because he's like, I'm sorry about Nibs, right? I acted out in the moment. And I hate the fact that instead of just saying, I got scared and I didn't really think about what I was doing, I was just acting out because she was scary, right? She immediately jumps in and says, oh, so you don't think we're human? And I'm like, he never said that. He didn't even say anything remotely like that. What are you talking about? It's almost like the writer, it's almost like there was two different writers, one writing each character, but they weren't communicating. So they vaguely knew where the scene was supposed to go to by the end, but they didn't actually make sure the conversation between the two fit together. It's really weird. I did not care for it at all. And she's in this weird place now where she's like, oh, I'm not a kid. I'm not a grown up. I'm not this, I'm not that, blah, 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 blah. And just kind of makes a bit of a speech about it all. And if you wanted to tell me the story over the course of a season of TV, that this girl who was put into a synth body, and forget the question of is it really her or a copy, right? That's a separate philosophical thing. If you want to tell me that over the course of this season, this girl realizes that she actually is the one that's powerful, and that she can rise up against her captors and the people who are maybe making her decisions for her, and go kind of nuclear by the end and like take control. The inmates are running the asylum, which is kind of the ending we get with like all the kids on the outside of the cell and all the adults on the inside of the cell. Then like that's not a bad idea for a story. I can see that being satisfying. I can see the value of these young characters, younger than they look, realizing their own worth and realizing they have something to fight for, whether that's themselves or some more noble goal, whatever it is. Like that could be a solid story. But we've spent so much time in this season dilly-dallying with other things. We've spent so much time not developing the core 5 characters' relationship, not developing their rivalry, so it feels like they're kind of getting over them when they start working together. It's in this kind of weird place at the end where I'm like, am I supposed to be rooting for them? Because honestly, Marcy does kind of seem a little bit unhinged. Like, obviously, I don't want to root for Boy Cavalier and his crew, right? They're obviously awful, but like, she does still kind of sound like a sociopath, and like, what are her intentions now? It's kind of weird. That was the other thing that frustrated me about the conversation with Joe, actually, is that at one point she said something, I don't even remember what it was, but Joe started to say, hey, sometimes life is complicated. It's not just a simple answer to everything. Things are complicated. And Marcy responds with, no, that's what people say to justify doing nothing. And again, this goes back to what I was saying about how it feels that both sides of the conversation aren't matching up. Because well, I get the point she's trying to make. I get this idea of like people talking themselves out of of doing something about whatever it might be. That's absolutely a real thing, right? Absolutely something that is worth talking about and worth being a subject in the story, any story really. However, it doesn't really counteract what he's trying to say, is that there is some stuff that's more complex. And I guess what they're going for here is that she is still effectively a child, so she's looking at things without complexity, she's looking at things as very black and white, and he's trying to basically explain nuance to her, and that there are sometimes more complicated details as to, why it's not easy to just make a simple choice for various things. And I found that, because it didn't really feel like it was bringing up the idea of, like, she doesn't understand that yet. If it just, I don't know. I was very frustrated by the writing throughout this entire episode, and that's before I even start complaining about this alien whispering bollocks that I've complained about it the last couple of episodes, but, you've got the xenomorph just chasing down Boy Cavalier like a dog for Wendy, or Marcy, and not attacking, just kind of intimidating, sitting there like a good boy. At the end, you've got the xenomorph just kind of hanging out above the cell under Marcy's control. There's lots of points in this episode where it'll just go to a close-up of Marcy's mouth as she's doing the noises, like the, doing all that shit. And the xenomorph's like getting the commands and running around. And at a certain point, I'm just like, what is this stupid bullshit? Like, what? This is the idea to do something with Alien, is this. It's just one of those things where you get to the end of the story and you're like, wait, this was the entire thing? This was the idea? And we're ending on a cliff. I'm supposed to be excited about this continuing? I just... I don't know. It's so... I do not like Prometheus, right? But I'm looking at Prometheus now after watching this show and thinking to myself, maybe I was a little harsh on Ridley. Maybe I was too dismissive. I mean, the movie's still not good, but at least it's only a movie. It's only 2 hours. This is... I don't know. I like... It at points the xenomorph feels like an afterthought, and that's not necessarily like the worst thing in the world, just because, I mean, maybe you shouldn't call it Alien, but having something set in the Alien universe is not about the alien itself, right? Having a show set on Earth with Weyland-Yutani and all the other companies, like, I think that's a fine idea. It almost feels like they have to put the alien in just so they can call it Alien, when I'm like, just call it Weyland-Yutani, or call it Prodigy, call it anything. Call it anything but Alien, and just don't force the xenomorph in if it's not going to actually be used in a meaningful capacity. And that's not to say that it's not been used in a meaningful capacity here. I just don't like the meaning that it's had. I don't like this. It'll be a good boy that does whatever its master synth hybrid says. It just completely sucks all of the... I've said this repeatedly throughout the season, but all the mystique, all of the intimidation is just gone. And not to mention the fact that, so all the synth kids feel poorly written, all very underserved, right? They don't feel like they have character arcs. They just kind of flip, right? On as soon as the script dictates that they have to be going another direction, they'll just go the other direction. Wendy's been the worst of it. She's flip-flopped and just not had arcs, just completely changed her mind about things throughout several of these episodes. And then you've got Arthur. Not Arthur, sorry. Arthur's the dead husband, who the eyeball alien takes by the end of the episode. So yeah, the actor's going to still get some work, apparently, as the eyeball alien. So that's something. But no, Joe. You've got Joe, who I find just to be a dud of a character. It's not that he flip-flops in the way that the synth kids do. He's not the same as them. He's not written badly in the same way. He's just a really, like, bland nothing character who has no agency, right? He never has any kind of, like, strong direction. It never feels like he's taking charge. Even when he's technically the one, orchestrating a breakout for him and his sister, it all feels very passive. It feels like he's just standing there watching what his sister's becoming, And I guess that's the point, because he's meant to be this, like, you know, judging over, is she still a human, is she this sociopath robot, is she this, is she that, and that's what he's there for. But it makes it very hard to care about him or root for him, because he effectively is just a character who survives not because he's proactive, not because he's smart, or not because he's any type of like action hero. And that's a very simplistic thing to say, but he just survives constantly because of, well, honestly, kind of plot armor. And I hate saying plot armor. I hate bringing that up, because I think plot armor is one of the most overused phrases in like movie storytelling critique. I really do. I think people on the internet start throwing around plot armor the second that someone doesn't die in a situation where they think, oh, they should have died there. I mean, that's just stupid, right? You're telling stories, people have to survive for the purpose of where they're going next. But the problem is when you keep putting characters in situations with creatures that have instantly killed others, that have just torn people to shreds, but then all of a sudden the xenomorph is just giving you a little stare down instead, or all of a sudden, like, you know, there's always a way out. There's always a way out at the last second. That just starts to feel like magic that the writers are putting in to save the character, rather than being something that's established, that was set up, that can be a tool, or set up something where, you know, whatever, like another character can save them at the right time, so on and so on. And you can have a little bit of like surprise Deus Ex Machina for effect occasionally. But if you do it constantly, especially when the character themselves does not feel that capable, it's a really bad combination here more than anything else. It's not just that he keeps surviving by the skin of his teeth and often just by sheer luck. It's that it's not like he otherwise feels very capable and knows what to do in situations. He's kind of stumbling through. So I can't even get behind him and root for him, because I think he's just kind of lame. The synth kids are so poorly written that their arcs are very unsatisfying, and I can kind of get what they're going for with them sometimes, but none of it's earned, so none of it matters to me, and I end up feeling more annoyed by the writing. Boy Cavalier, you know, he tells a story in this episode about how he built his first synth at 6 years old and then had the synth kill his father, and then the synth pretended to be his dad, and that was the start of his rise of the empire. I don't know. It just feels a bit try hard, or at the very least, it feels a bit try hard when all you do is have someone say it. Again, this is another example of telling rather than showing, and the show has been kind of guilty of that throughout, where instead of just having the ideas there for us to speculate and find the subtext, it wants the characters to openly talk about the subtext. And that always makes it worse. It always makes it more pretentious, right? You know, even at the end of the episode, Marcy's like, "Oh, you were never a boy. You're not Peter Pan. You were never a boy. You've always been a little man." Like, it just, like, I mean, that last part's okay, you know, to put him down a peg or two. Don't get me wrong, but like, again, like we're saying all of the themes and ideas that the show wants us to think about out loud. And that's something I complained about all the way back in episode 1, when Kirsch gave a little speech to Marcy/Wendy on the way to the ship, where he started talking about humans and death and blah, 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 blah. And it was like, you're spelling things out in a way that's making this feel very shallow, even though it wants to be deep. And that is still a problem here at the end. And then on top of that, you've just got all this unsatisfying payoff to everything, where the actual chaos on the island isn't that exciting. The conflict between Morrow and Kirsch, or Morrow and just everyone on the island, isn't that exciting. Yeah, I don't know. I really have nothing positive to really say about it. One or two moments, you know, very slim moments are okay, but it's a sort of thing where they're kind of hindered because I'm having such a bad time otherwise. It doesn't matter how good on paper like one little idea is, when everything else is, you know, it's a you know, it compounds as you go as well. Like, a problem that was in episode 1 doesn't feel as bad as episode 8 when I've been having those problems for 8 episodes. So now I'm frustrated because it wasn't just a blip. It was like, no, this is a systemic problem in the writing that is only feeling worse as it goes on, because you're supposed to care more the more a show goes on. But if there's problems in the writing, then the problems just keep getting worse and worse. They keep adding on to each other. And you've got this really wonky scaffolding of a story that's ready to topple over at any point. And that's just kind of how I feel. And of course, it does the needle drop at the end to a rock song, which again, still just feels tonally way out of line for the Alien universe to me. Hey, Predator Badlands might be good. There's a Weyland-Yutani droid in that. We've got something good in the Alien Predator universe, possibly on the horizon. Hopefully that's good. We'll be reviewing that over on the Sci-Fi Movie Podcast, the Atomic Cinema Experiment, over on the movie channel, Mailed Fuzz Movies. I'm promoting that. Now, it's the best I can make out of this bad situation, but that is my thoughts on the finale to Alien Earth. To sum it up in a sentence, it was pretty shit. So, there you go. That also sums up my thoughts on the show as a whole, frankly. So, I did not like it. I was not, these last couple of episodes were a chore to sit through. I did not enjoy sitting through these. To the point where I'm like, am I even going to try a season 2? Because I'm probably going to hate it now. Like, I feel pretty confident I'm not going to like it. So it may not even be worth me trying. I wanted to see this first season through to the end, though. I care about the Alien and Predator franchises a bit too much. Probably unhealthily so, to just drop it there. But I don't know. Well, we'll see how I feel when season 2 rolls around. If it gets renewed, which it hasn't yet, frankly. So we'll see. But yeah, let me know what you thought of the season and the finale in the comments. Like, subscribe, helps out a bunch if you do, and you can support even more so over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV or by becoming a YouTube member. Any and all support is greatly appreciated. Thanks to everyone who already does. That is me. I'll see you guys soon. Gen V season 2 just started. I'm reviewing that. Obviously got Patreon shows on the go. I am still going to go back and do Squid Game Season 3 and Star Trek Strange New World Season 3 because I got sick when those were... Either I was meant to be doing one of them and then the other one started when I was sick. Those will come in some form. Maybe a slightly different format to get through them quicker, but they'll be here in some form at some point. But yeah, Gen V is the new ongoing hotness, which is better than Alien Earth so far. So that's something. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?